Welcome to Getting to Know You. This was started, the idea was started by Betty Osan, who felt that we live in a community of like 350 people, but we don't necessarily know specific things about them when we're playing a game or having dinner. And so this was to be more like a fireside chat, but being in Arizona, we decided we didn't need the fire, we could just do it in the chat.
Definitely.
And so today, I have Frank Skinner with me, and what an interesting man.
Oh, my.
So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yes, first of all, I don't tend to think of engineers and music as going together.
Oh, actually, they do.
Do they?
Yes.
Okay.
The head of the department
Uh-huh.
where in college was an engineer and a marvelous pianist.
Very good.
Superb. And I think it's something about the organization,
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I played music with quite a few people who had technical backgrounds. And
Uh-huh.
yes.
Who spurred that interest in music?
Oh, well, in my case, my mother.
Uh-huh.
She was a organist and a pianist,
Uh-huh.
and I was one of four.
Uh-huh.
And so all four kids had to take piano lessons, starting fairly early.
Uh-huh.
And then there was a lot of singing in the family,
Mm-hmm.
and then we each had to pick an instrument.
Uh-huh.
And
And you picked the
cello.
cello. What had you picking the cello?
Uh,
That's a big instrument.
well, I was number 3 in line,
Okay.
and my older sister picked violin.
Mm-hmm.
My older brother played the flute,
Mm-hmm.
so I had to do something different. And it turns out there was a very old, hardly working cello in the attic.
Oh.
Because my father had wanted to play cello when he was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and he had one. He never really learned much.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it out and fooled around with it several times, and so my mother decided, cello.
Uh-huh. But that's a big one to haul around.
It is.
And am I also correct in believing you have to have a good ear for music?
Yeah, I would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think I got that from my mother was a very good alto singer.
Mm-hmm.
And actually my older sister was a voice major in college.
Uh-huh.
And as I say, there was a lot of singing whenever we were out in the car or
Mm-hmm.
anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother had very good pitch,
Mm-hmm.
and I fortunately inherited that.
Uh-huh.
I don't have absolute pitch, which
Uh-huh.
means you can just
Yes.
hit, but I have very good relative pitch,
Mm-hmm.
so I can sing, hear the intervals.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I find once I learn a piece, I sing with a choir,
Mm-hmm.
I can sort of hear what's coming in the next chord.
Uh-huh.
It's just nothing I do deliberately.
It's just there.
It's there, and
Uh-huh.
I'm very grateful.
Uh-huh, yes. Plus you've traveled a lot with your music.
Yes, the choir.
Mhm.
Yeah, I sing in the Mountain View Presbyterian Church choir, and I joined them shortly after I moved here,
Mm-hmm.
about 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, got to take 4 trips. First one to Italy, the second one was to France, third one was to Spain, and the fourth one was to Germany and Czechoslovakia.
Mm-hmm.
And we were due to take a 5th trip, but COVID
COVID.
said nope.
Yep, interfered with that.
That was going to be northern Italy and Switzerland, which I was
Uh-huh.
looking forward to. But
Uh-huh. When you were growing up, what was it like to be the doctor's kid?
Well, I don't really know because he died when I was quite young.
Oh, really?
He was born in the early 1890s,
Mm-hmm.
and his father was a country doctor,
Mm-hmm.
literally horse and buggy. You know, he'd go to homes that,
Mm-hmm.
And my father always, well, when my grandfather became a doctor, he just went to New York and worked in a hospital for some period of time, went home, and he was a doctor. And my father always wanted to be a doctor, but there wasn't too much money to support education. He finished high school, worked for a while, then he went to college, worked for a while. He actually was in the biology department at Allegheny College when my mother was a student there.
Uh-huh.
So he was 10 years older than she was. So he was, and then when he got his, spent a little more time working, and then he went to medical school part-time at Rush Medical in Chicago.
Uh-huh.
And the other part of the year, he was a dean of students at Virginia Medical College in Richmond.
Wow, he was busy.
And so it took him several years to. And as a result, my older sister was born in Richmond. My older brother was born in Chicago. I was born in Richmond. And then he finished and then we moved to Meadville, Pennsylvania.
Uh-huh.
And my younger brother was born there.
There.
So, but he had scarlet fever as a kid and almost died, but it weakened his cardiovascular system. So he died shortly before World War II, just 10 years after he set up his practice. And I was I was about seven at the time. So, but the one memory I would say is the smell of ether. He also did a lot of anesthesiology work. So there was always the smell of ether here and there, which I do not like.
Right. It was a good thing once they progressed to something else, wasn't it?
Yeah. But he was a very attentive father. My younger brother is a retired minister and has written a few books, and one of which was about our growing up in Meadville. And one of the things he mentions in there is that my father, whenever he came home after we were all in bed, he would always come into the bedroom and, look in, make sure we were okay. And, yeah.
Very caring family.
Yes.
And your mom was left with a real challenge then.
She was.
4 children, goodness.
Four kids, 8. My sister was the oldest, so she actually got to, herd the little boys around. But she was a very strong-willed woman, so there was no lack of discipline. And, she made sure things ran the way she wanted them to run.
And it was your mom or your sister or both that would run that tight ship?
Both my sister and she apparently liked the role. After she got married, she had 6 kids herself. So.
So you're an uncle many times
Oh
over.
yes.
What's it like to be an uncle?
Fun. You're not responsible for them.
Yeah.
Actually, a nephew, my younger brother's son, and his wife were here late last week. So
Very nice.
The whole family is still there are no feuds. Family is all very friendly, and they live in Minnesota, and we're down for a week. And they contacted me and said, "Would we come for a visit?" And I absolutely.
And starting from November on, it's pretty good to get out of Minnesota.
Yes.
So I'm an only child, but my aunts and uncles were extremely important to me. And I used to think it would have been fun to be an aunt. Because
Yes.
it's a nice role. So, and you have family that live around here.
No.
No family around here.
No family around here. My older brother and sister are both gone. And he had 3 sons. They all live in California.
Ooh.
See them once in a while, but haven't seen them in a few years now. My sister settled in York, Pennsylvania, and all her 6 are in the East Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York State. My three kids are all east. And although I'm divorced, my ex-wife and I are very good friends. She lives in Virginia. And we frequently, not the past couple of years, of course, but we get together and go visit the kids and grandkids.
That's called a good divorce, when it's just
Yes.
the husband and wife divorced, not the whole family.
I credit her mother, who after Catherine and I separated, kept inviting me for Thanksgiving dinner or joined them for Christmas. So
Right.
we finally worked back to a friendship that still exists.
Which is
A
a
couple of
tribute.
the travels, had a couple of very good trips with her over the years.
And you've done Asia a couple of times.
Yes. Yeah, those were with her. She lives with two other women in Virginia. And the four of us took two trips, one to China in 1996 and then one to Vietnam in 1999. Both, first one was 4 to 5 weeks long and the second one was 6 weeks, so rather extensive trips.
Yes, they were. And what are the highlights?
The trip, different for the two trips. China, my former wife discovered the trip through, she was a psychiatric social worker. And through some social work organization, the American University in Guam was sponsoring a trip to China for, we were called American experts, which is kind of a funny term. But the trip was 2 weeks at Zhejiang University in Jinhua, Zhejiang province, which is kind of the southeast coast. And then 2 weeks with someone from the university hosting us at different sites around the country, Xi'an and Beijing and Shanghai, Hanoi. So the 2 weeks we were at the university, we were essentially students, but also had to give a few talks. But we took classes in Chinese painting, calligraphy, a little bit of Chinese language. I probably have 4 words. And the gentleman who was teaching the Chinese language to us had been over to the States as an exchange professor. So anyway, probably the funniest remembrance of it, one of the classes we took was Tai Chi. And this little short Chinese gentleman, that part of China, most of the people are fairly small.
Right.
I felt, in contrast, when we got out of Xi'an, that's where Yao Ming, the best basketball players from, people were,
Very tall.
everybody was very tall. So it's quite a contrast. But anyway, at the Tai Chi, he spoke no English, so everything was turned left, And he insisted on having the class outdoors. So here were these 4 gangly Caucasians, and of course we got quite a crowd of students each session. So really trying to not make fools of ourselves. But so it was extremely interesting trip. And to me, one of the nice parts was we were literally on the local economy. We did not stay in resort hotels. We stayed in student guest houses at universities when we traveled to the different sites. We were eating Chinese cuisine with chopsticks. I mean, we didn't have an English meal till we, if you will, till we left the country. And at the end of the 4 weeks that they had arranged, we'd gone in through Hong Kong, because at that time there were no direct flights into China. So we went in through Hong Kong and then went back out through Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent 4 or 5 days there on each end. And we also went to Xi'an, which, oh dear, I forget the name of it now, down in the Guilin, down in the southwestern part of the country, where they have a lot of these, the Li River with all these karst
Mm-hmm.
rock formations, very unusual countryside. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Yeah.
marvelous trip.
I had an aunt who went to China when it first opened, and she was told to bring pencils, that people wanted pencils.
Oh, yes.
And
Actually, we took pencils on our trip.
did you?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
because we were going to the university and we were told that was,
Uh-huh. Something that they wanted.
yes.
Uh-huh. Our daughter did a 3-week bike ride through
Ooh.
China.
Oh, my.
And with that trip, she ended up getting sick and had to go to the hospital. And she said it was like a World War I movie, that there were the metal beds and nurses with dresses down to the floor and caps,
Yeah.
and very, very formal.
It was also Chinese medicine
Yes.
as opposed to Western.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And when our daughter was there was a man that looked very ill in a gurney on the side. And so she said, go ahead and take care of him first. I'll be okay. And they said, no, he hasn't paid his bill yet.
Oh,
And so,
oh dear.
yes, but it was quite an experience.
That experience, in a way, relates to our trip to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Because my ex-wife ended up teaching. She went back and got a doctorate in social work and was teaching at Marywood University in near Scranton, Pennsylvania. And one of the other women of the three was head of the nursing department at Scranton University. And the two of them arranged sabbaticals
Mm-hmm.
at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 4 of us took this trip to Vietnam. The woman who was the director of nursing and the other gal who was also a nurse had served in Vietnam during the war. They weren't field nurses, they were headquarters nurses. But they had always wanted to go back to see the country.
Mm-hmm.
And they worked through, oh dear, I'm not sure, I don't remember the name of the organization, an organization in Washington, D.C. that deals with nursing organizations throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
And they set up a program where they would offer focus group training for the Vietnamese Nurses Association.
How interesting.
And that was the basis for the trip.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 6 weeks in Vietnam, because they did the focus work group at five locations, I guess. Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, Da Nang, which is on the east coast, Halong Bay, which is way up in the north of Vietnam, and Can Tho, which is down in the Delta region in the south. So, and we were hosted by representatives of the Vietnamese Nurses Association at each location. So we got to see essentially the whole country,
Mm-hmm.
north to south. And I was along as bag carrier and don't taker. But it was very interesting, very friendly, both North and South Vietnam. I'm sure people who were there during the war might have a different view, but
Mm-hmm.
what we found were very friendly people, very entrepreneurial. The first day we met was to plan the things. And at the end of the session, which was about an hour long, the Vietnamese people who were present broke into song. They end every meeting with singing folk song.
How nice.
Yes. quite a different view.
Yes.
But the thing that you mentioned about the nursing, up in Halong Bay, which is kind of coal country up in the northern part, very poor. And the session was held at a hospital. And as we were driving up, we saw a man walking down the road. Driver said he's on his way home, didn't have transportation. He just got released from the hospital. He's walking home. And while we were at the hospital, we toured the orthopedic ward. A small room, about half the size of this room. 15 beds.
Wow.
And 2 people in several beds.
Wow.
So it was
Crowded.
This was 1999. But the nurses, they were paid the equivalent of about $30 a month. But they were the happiest group of people. We couldn't understand, of course, but they were always joking with each other and having fun with things. So it really, rather different outlook.
I like the idea of ending a meeting with song.
Yes.
You'd always have a good meeting if you could end it with a song. Very interesting. Is Vietnam as pretty as I've heard?
Yes, very, and very different views. I mean, than I'm on the seacoast. Have to tell you a little story about that one too. And then the Delta country down south, which is, with transportation, we had to take a couple ferries to get around because of it. And the Charles Rock Formation I mentioned in China also exists at the Halong Bay region in the north. So we took a short boat tour up there to see these very odd shaped rocks sticking out of the water. In Da Nang on the east, and the gentleman who it was a man who was the head of the Nurses Association there, who met us, and he rode a motorcycle. And after we got to know him, he said, "Oh, you must come to my restaurant." And we said, "Oh." So we said, "Certainly." So he gave us the address. And he was just a very interesting person. He was South Vietnamese. The woman he married was the daughter of a North Vietnamese general. And he had heard her sing on the radio. And he liked her voice. So he got in touch with her. And one thing and another, they got married. And they had 5 kids. Two boys were twins, and a daughter, and then 2 others. Well, the night he invited us to, actually the restaurant was run by his wife, because he was involved in nursing. We got to the restaurant. They had closed it just for us.
Wow.
And they took us up to the top floors, like 3 or 4 stories tall, to a open area. And we were served the most delicious Vietnamese meal you can imagine. And then after dinner, he asked his wife to sing for us. So she sang some Vietnamese folk songs. And it turns out that 3 of their 5 children also went into the restaurant business. And one of them was a daughter who had another restaurant in Da Nang. We didn't know which one. And then the 2 twin boys had a restaurant in Ho Chi Minh City, former Saigon. And we had not been there yet. So the next night we were actually just out walking along the coast, looking, sightseeing and looking for a place to have dinner. And we wandered into a restaurant that looked interesting. And we were seated at an open deck facing the water. And as we're sitting there, we hear this voice, ah! And he comes across,
Wow.
and this was his daughter's restaurant,
Oh,
which we had just accidentally picked.
yes.
So pretty quickly, some free aperitifs appeared at the table. And when we left, the bill was cut in half. We, and then they gave us the address of their son's restaurant in Ho Chi Minh City. So when we were there the following week, we decided to try and go there for dinner, and took a cab. Well, the first night we went, actually, as we went in the door, this young man says, "Oh, welcome." And he had called and told them what we looked like and to look out for us. They had a wedding party there that night, so it was really too busy. So we came back the following night and again had a marvelous meal, including a corn soup which his mother had. She'd come up with a recipe for it. We had it when we were at their restaurant in Da Nang. They served the same corn soup at their restaurant. So again, a very interesting trip where we were essentially not tourists. We were, dealing with local people, eating meals with them, and really, as I say, very interesting.
And to this day, do you like Oriental food?
Do I?
Like Oriental food?
Oh, well, I always have. I like it. You name it, I'll eat it.
And are you good with the chopsticks?
Yes, I can pick up a peanut.
Oh, very good. Yes.
Back to China, when several times we had no idea what we were eating, because when we were out touring the other cities, there was a small van with us and our guide from the university and the driver. And he would just stop. He'd just signal the driver, "Look, stop over here." And, he'd go in if he liked the appearance of it. He'd say, "Come on in." We'd go in. No menus, of course. And nobody spoke English. He would order for us, and we would eat. And snake soup, and all sorts of interesting.
So, are you still good at trying new foods?
Oh, yeah,
Good.
yes. I have not found much of anything I do not like.
When our daughter was there, she said they had like 4 or 5 people waiting on one person because they need jobs and
Yeah, there were, yes.
highly serviced.
And another interesting thing sort of popped into my mind. The night we arrived, flying in from Hong Kong, we flew into Shanghai, and the president of the university came up to greet us as the foreign expert. He and his wife, and a few other people from the university, and we had what they call a banquet. 18 courses.
Wow.
Just one after the other after the other. And then at the end, one of them popped up and offered a toast. So we're sort of sitting there, what do we do here? So I finally decided I ought to get up and offer a toast to our host, which I did. No one had warned us this was coming, but as I say, this 18 course meal, just unbelievable.
Which reminds me, our son has a very, very good friend since 2nd grade who married a woman whose father was from China and mother was from Japan. And when they got married, our son was best man, and they went to eat, and our son, who was sort of, his stomach, we always teased, was divided. He couldn't, but he wanted to be a good guest. So he had all these foods that he hadn't had before, and he kept eating and eating, only to find out later that you have to stop eating so they know you're full.
Oh, yes.
We've often teased him about that.
Oh, dear.
So, it's interesting, the customs of different
Different-
cultures, isn't it?
Yes.
I,
yeah.
I like when that
And we
happens.
really, as Americans, we aren't the type who learn
No.
those cultures before we go.
Right, right. Well, and you've had many trips in Europe too.
Yeah, the choir trips.
Uh-huh.
And each of those is a combination of 4 or 5 performances
Mm-hmm.
plus quite a bit of sightseeing.
Mm-hmm.
And they were fun for another reason. My daughter is never married,
Mm-hmm.
and she sings alto. So she actually came along with the choir and
Oh,
sang
nice.
with us on 3 of the 4 trips.
Uh-huh.
She couldn't go on the trip to Spain. And at that point, my younger brother had lost his first wife and was looking but not married.
Mm-hmm.
He also sings.
Mm-hmm.
And so I invited him to go to Spain with me.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I decided as long as we're going over, we're going to make the trip worthwhile. He and I found a trip to Scotland
Oh, wow.
for a week ahead of it. Ended just the day we were supposed to show up in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
So it worked out perfectly.
Uh-huh.
So he and I flew to Scotland and did that and then went to Spain. So he was in Spain with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other had another long trip that I'll come to in a second, but the trip to France where my daughter went with me, we also visited Amsterdam and
Mhm.
Belgium, and
Mm-hmm.
we stayed another week after the 2-week choir trip to
Mm-hmm.
do some sightseeing. Again, while my brother was in between before he'd remarried, his son, who was the one who visited me last week, he and his wife have no children, but they travel all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
She's a photographer, and do you remember when the I-35 bridge went down in Minneapolis?
Absolutely.
Well, she was working as a photographer for is it the Star in Minneapolis
Uh-huh.
paper? And she happened to be, she always has cameras with her,
Mm-hmm.
and she was walking about 2 or 3 blocks away and heard it, and zipped
Yes,
right over
uh-huh.
there, and took, I don't know if you recall it, there was a centerfold
Yes.
that in Newsweek,
Mhm.
that was her picture.
Oh, wow.
And once that, they put a few in the paper, she actually had to get an agent
Mhm.
to represent her because she was getting all these
Mhm.
calls. She no longer works as a photographer, but she still takes pictures.
Pictures.
And she loves to go to Paris and stay by herself for several weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Just wander around Paris
Taking
taking
pictures.
pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And they sometimes travel separately. So her husband, my brother's son, invited Dawn and I, my brother, to go on a trip to Europe with him.
Uh-huh.
And he arranged everything. They have a timeshare, so he arranged timeshares at different spots or other accommodations, sometimes little, but livable. But since my brother and I were both retired and having fun, he and I decided to meet in New York and take in some theater and
Mm-hmm.
good food. And then we got on the Queen Elizabeth, sailed across to Southampton.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve flew over and met us at Southampton. And then the 3 of us spent over 2 weeks, I forget how long now. We went to France, took the Channel, the train,
Mm-hmm.
did France. We did some things in England first, Stonehenge and
Mm-hmm.
other things of that nature. Went over to France, then we went to Belgium, we went to Amsterdam, and then because it was easier for Steve to fly back through Iceland,
Mm.
Reykjavik, is that whatever pronunciation? Am I thinking Iceland or Greece? Yeah, Iceland.
Iceland.
Yes. And yeah, we flew back through Iceland and I did some sightseeing there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Don and I flew back to New York and he flew on home to
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So another marvelous trip.
Mm-hmm. You've had many marvelous trips.
Yes.
And I'm also thinking, you had a long-term relationship with IBM, right?
I worked for them for 33 and a half years.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
With a dress code.
Not so much where I was.
Oh, okay.
The field offices,
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you a little story on this. The field offices, absolutely. I was in the laboratory as an engineer.
Okay.
And there were, if we had guests, we were supposed to wear a tie and coat, you know, if we were entertaining someone. Otherwise, it was fairly casual.
Mm-hmm.
The offices, however, the field offices, it was very definitely strict. But you went to the research lab at Yorktown, and it was casual all the time. But one of the, I got involved in computer graphics, which is a different story, but it was very early in the era of computer graphics. Absolutely nothing like what you have today. You have much more on your cell phone than we had in equipment that rented for $15,000 a month. But early on in the, I got involved with doing some of the language development, software development for some of the equipment. And we were asked to make a visit to U.S. Steel, which was a rather established business at that point.
Right.
And there were three of us going. We got to the sales office the next morning to take us to the site. And one of our three was sort of a maverick. He had on a gold-colored shirt. He had a tie and coat. But they said, "You're not going to visit. You stay here at the office all day." So we sat around the office all day while the rest of us were in white shirt and tie and going, while we visited. Yep.
What had you going to MIT?
Well, I was always interested. Math, turns out, was a very simple subject for me. I mean, in contrast to one of my sons who failed algebra 3 times, but is now working in a technical field. But math always came very easy to me, and I was very interested in that, you know, something technical. And I had, after my father's death, my mother and her father decided that all three boys needed some male discipline in their lives, since my father was no longer around. So they set things up so we, each of us in turn, went to Mercersburg Academy in Pennsylvania for the last 2 years of high school. And I actually had, people don't believe it, I had to work harder there than I did when I got to MIT.
Interesting.
Because it was extremely rigorous. But so there was math and chemistry and physics and English and French and you name it. But the 2 years there convinced me I wanted to do something in an engineering field. So I figured, why not try for MIT, which I did and was accepted. And got to the, when I went, I thought I was going to be a chemical engineer. But during the first year, you don't declare your major right away. I decided no, it was going to be mechanical engineering. And I got the bachelor's degree. And as part of that, I had gone on a co-op assignment my junior year to Milwaukee, A.O. Smith in Milwaukee. And had done a variety of things. I'd asked, I want a lot of different things. I still hadn't found anything I wanted to do. And so I said, okay. At that point, I could go back for a master's, which I did. And at that point, I still hadn't found anything I wanted to do. But I've been ROTC, and I had a commitment to the Army. So after the master's, that's the year I got married, and then went into the Army for 2 years. And since I still hadn't found my niche, through the Army I had the GI Bill, and then I applied for a fellowship and decided to go back and get a doctorate, and which I did, and which led in a kind of a funny way to the career in computer graphics. I don't know if you want to. At that point, IBM was giving large computers to various universities.
Right.
This was in the 1950s. And they gave one to MIT. And they also provided a fellowship for each department just to try and get people to use the equipment, see what it could be used for. And nobody else in the ME department wanted anything to do with this. Oh, that's electrical engineering. And I was a ME major, math minor, and this just clicked. So I applied for that, and the last 2 years of getting my doctorate, I had a fellowship from IBM. And this equipment had a display. And I said, what's that? Well, there was another piece of equipment, which was a film recorder, so it was a closed box, which couldn't let light in. But you could display from the computer, you could put images on the screen and take a picture. And I never found out what it was really intended for. But they had this monitor set there so you could see what was going on inside. And you could control all this from the computer. So I put together a little tic-tac-toe game. So you could sit at the console of the computer and click switches and play, and have the computer play against you. And lo and behold, I would never really considered IBM until the end of when I was looking for a job. Most computer usage at that point was large aerospace and automotive companies. But IBM invited me for an interview, and I went and liked what I saw, and ended up moving to Poughkeepsie, New York, to work in the lab. Well, lo and behold, the computer I would be using when I got there also had one of these film recorder display units on it. There were only 4 ever built, and I have no idea what happened. But so that was available to me, and I just kept playing around with it. So there's, I'm a kind of a visual person. I do jigsaw puzzles, love puzzles. And I just kept fooling around with it, saying, gotta be a way to use this for some of the engineering work I'm doing. And put together some demos and things of that nature. In fact, it was because of that we got invited to U.S. Steel, because they were interested in, one of the little demos I put together was designing bridge truss structures. And somebody said that might be. Well, along about this same time, this is in the 1960s, IBM was looking for a way to get into commercial graphics, because they had the contract for the DEW line in Canada, distant early warning, all the SAGE displays and so forth that were intended to spot missiles coming over from Russia. So they had all this expertise in the Kingston lab, about 15 miles north of Poughkeepsie, in graphics. And they wanted to see, is there any way to make some commercial use of this? So I got invited to join that group, and which is how I kept going. And then once that equipment got designed and announced and on sale, I ended up going back to the Fishkill lab, which is south of Poughkeepsie, to a department that was responsible for doing writing all the software for engineers to use to design computer equipment, circuits and cards and boards, that kind of thing. And we acquired some of our own graphic equipment. And I ended up writing graphic computer-aided design software for the last 20 years of my 33 and a half years. A little game of tic-tac-toe led to a career.
That's very interesting. We had one of the first big IBM computers, you know, screen, etc. And our son saw it in the Smithsonian in Washington. And he was sure it was going to be, you know, so he kept it. And finally, I think maybe just a couple of years ago, decided it wasn't going to be the rare thing that he had hoped. So. But it traveled many places with him. They were huge.
Yes.
Well.
And again, you have more power on your
That's right.
cell phone now.
I know. Isn't that something?
It's unbelievable.
It is. Well, Frank, I so appreciate your letting us getting to know you better.
Well,
And just your life has been very, very interesting.
and we even haven't touched on much of the music.
No, we didn't touch much on the
Right.
music, except for your choir
Singing, yeah.
experiences. And as I said, that music and engineering was interesting to me.
Yeah.
But you
Well,
said not
thank you
as
for
rare.
inviting me. I really
Absolutely, absolutely.
been fun.
Good, good. Thank you.